Welcome to my channel where we cover the lore of Final Fantasy XIV. We cover the stories both big and small, the epic and the cute, the silly and the tragic. I hope you all enjoy the ride, and welcome to the Chronicler of Lore. Now that the Scions have gotten used to being in their bodies again, Alphinaud thinks it's time for them to get back to work, solving the world's problems, one fetch quest at a time. With the chaos in Garlemald, a lot of rumors have been coming out of the nation, so Thancred wants to sneak across the border to see what's really going on out there. Urianger thinks that's a good idea since you all need to know just how big of a threat you can expect from the fractured empire, and you need to know if Xenos is the one pulling the strings. Since he thinks it's such a good idea, Urianger decides to go with Thancred, and since he needs someone to make his ammo for him, he can't really object to the company. Alisaie's already figured out what she wants to work on, but before she can explain, Lee swings by for a visit, and G'raha Tia proves that he wasn't just a fanboy over you. Apparently his knowledge of all the Scions is extensive, which Lee thinks is a little weird since she's never actually met him. But she has heard about him, and since he was so important in your mission to save the First, she counts him as a friend, despite the fact that he did nearly kill you all in the process. The fact that the little endeavor dealt a serious blow to the Ascians does give him some bonus points, but finding out that Hydaelyn and Zodiark are primals is a lot for her to take in. While Zodiark will never be able to regain his full power now that the threat of calamities and rejoinings are over, he's still a threat that the Scions will have to watch out for. Of course, Lise didn't come by just to talk about primals or to check on her friends. She has a message from the Alliance about the Empire. When Varys was killed, his cousin Nerva tried to take the throne, but he wasn't the only one who wanted it, so a civil war broke out. The fighting has destroyed a whole lot of the capital of Garlemald itself, and its territories aren't doing any better. The Alliance is going to meet up in Alamigo to decide what's the best way they can capitalize on the situation, and they want the Scions there. Since Thancred was already planning a trip to the Empire, he's more than willing to get more information from the Alliance if it can make his trip easier. Alisaie decides to opt out of the meeting because she wants to work on curing tempering, and the Warrior of Light would much rather do that than sit in a meeting. And G'raha very enthusiastically volunteers to come with you. From the minute Alisaie had started working on curing Halric, she had been thinking about Gabu, and since she learned that people who were corrupted by the light were able to be fixed, she figures it'll work on tempering too. But she wants to learn a little more before she just rushes off to Limsa, because if she's wrong, she could kill her little kobold friend. The problem is there aren't very many places where she could learn anything about tempering, since the research hasn't really been moving forward over the years. At least the research of the modern scholars hadn't moved forward. From what G'raha knows, the Allagans did quite a bit of research on that particular subject, and if any of their research is still around, it'll be in the Etherochemical Research Facility out in Azizla, which makes sense since that's where the Allagans experimented on primals and their worshippers. Alisaie's never been there, but she knows that you'll need an airship, which is something that Tataru has the perfect solution for. It's called the Bonanza, and it's the Scions of the Seven Dawn's very own airship that she had built with some help from some friends at the Rising Stones. Tataru wanted to pilot it herself because she's cheap, but her training went about as well as her attempts to become an Arcanist, which is to say they went extremely bad, so she hired a member of the Garland Ironworks to do the job for her. So you get to fly to Azizla in style. While G'raha's never been to the place, he knows his way around because of all the records in the Crystal Tower, which means he knows exactly where you all need to go. With a quick Google search, G'raha finds a report on iconic corruption, only to find that someone deleted it, but the author's name, a guy called Owen, probably kept a copy of his work somewhere else. There's a place nearby called the Habitsphere where the researchers who worked in Azizla lived, so it's likely the man kept some backup files in his house, which means more flying around Azizla. G'raha goes to pull up the information from one of the floating nodes, but the thing says that an evacuation order is currently in effect, so no one is allowed in the Habitsphere. That order likely came during the Fourth Umbral Calamity, so it will likely never end on its own. In typical Alisaie fashion, she just wants to break down doors and force her way into the Habitsphere, but G'raha has a more subtle way that is less likely to damage the stuff you're looking for. If you can send an energy surge through the control system for the area, it should reboot the system and cause the doors to open on their own. That of course requires a sufficient energy source, but lightning shards form in areas of stagnant ether around the continent, so scooping up a few of those should be enough to do the job. The fact that such a mundane bit of information was in some of the reports G'raha read in the tower shows just how thorough the Allagans were, but it also means you have to do a fetch quest. And since Alizé's there, she wants to turn it into a race to see which one of you can find a shard first. Because G'raha Tia has a love for the old days, instead of hunting his own shard, he follows you just so he can reenact the scene from your first meeting during the adventure of the Crystal Tower. Alizé actually fails to find a shard at all, and she's not happy about it, but at least you have what you need. G'raha's plan works, but the reboot doesn't do anything about the defenses of the Habitsphere. Fortunately, G'raha's royal blood should let him explore the area without getting attacked, so he heads off alone while you and Alizé sit, wait, and talk. This Owen guy's report makes Alizé think about the thesis papers that she had to write back in Sharlayan. Of course, hers was on the different ways to apply ether in combat. Alphinaud obviously wrote something more on the political side, talking about his nation's duty to the rest of the world. He claimed that Sharlayan's knowledge should be used to protect all life on the planet, which is not something that went over too well in a non-interventionist land like Sharlayan. His dad, being one of the nation's political leaders, was a little bit upset about the whole thing. Alphinaud didn't care, and he was more than willing to argue with anyone who objected. G'raha finally makes it back mid-conversation, and it's no surprise that his thesis was about the Allagan civilization. Unlike the twins, he wasn't a student of the studium, but he did have to write a thesis to earn his Archon marks. His trip to Owen's chamber bore fruit, and he found the man's archive node, which contains the information you seek. But of course, things won't be that easy. Even though the node recognizes G'raha as a member of the royal family, the information you need requires a password, and you don't know it. Alizé actually tries to use the word password as password, and the computer says that she's so stupid she's no longer allowed to talk in the presence of royalty, which makes her want to kill the thing, something that really wouldn't help the situation. Instead, G'raha decides it'll be better to see if Cid can help solve this problem. Of course, that means you have to find him, which is a job better suited for Tataru than you, so you all head back to the Rising Stones with the Allagan node in tow. Tataru makes a few calls and Cid agrees to meet you at the stones, which gives you time for Kral to tell you what happened at the meeting. The different Imperial legions have all started working on their own individual plans. The most dangerous seems to be the 3rd Legion under the command of Lord Nerva. They've gotten a lot of money from House Brutus, the same family that took in Yotsuyu and Asahi, which is not a good thing for anyone because both of them were crazy. They still don't know what Xenos is doing, but hopefully Thancred and Urianger will know more once they get back. For now, the Alliance leaders think it'll be a bad idea to interfere, so they want to go back to working on the primal problem. They want to work with the friendly groups among the beast tribes to try and find a way to get peace once and for all. Kral thinks they're trying to deal with all of their small conflicts before the big fight with the Empire that's definitely coming in the future, because it will probably be devastating. Whatever they're planning, it won't be easy to get the beast tribes to trust the people, especially the Lamensans. So they've recruited Alphinaud and Y'shtola to try and ease the tensions just a bit. Until the issue of tempering's been dealt with, it's not likely any real progress will be made, so Alizé's cure will be mandatory if there's going to be any hope for peace between the tribes, which means there's nothing more to do until Cid arrives. When Cid shows up with Biggs and Wedge, they're all super excited to see G'raha again since they had expected him to sleep for a lot longer, which he technically did. And Cid technically figured out the secrets of traveling through time and space, which he's having a hard time wrapping his head around since the current him is nowhere near figuring out how to do that. But he'll figure out how to do that once he solves your current problem. Honestly, it's not all that complicated figuring out the node's password. He just has to modify some magitech so it can do the work for him, and since G'raha has a dictionary full of Allagan words, it doesn't take long for him to find out that the password is freedom. The report has information on how icons corrupt people and bind them to their will. The process is exactly like what Alizé thought. Tempering happens when the ether of someone's soul is shifted to match the element that the icon represents. Normally people's ether is perfectly balanced, as all things should be, but if they're exposed to an icon like Sephiroth, their ether would shift to the earth aspect. This would enhance the wielder's earth magic, along with giving them superhuman endurance. Exposing them more than once would cause their powers to grow, and eventually their bodies would mutate. There's more to the process than just changing the person's elemental alignment, however. Their souls either become umbrally charged or stagnant during the process. If the soul is made stagnant, the person will lose their own mind, and it'll be replaced by the will of the icon, which makes the person worship them and makes the icon stronger. The Allagans actually managed to make material that could shield people from the icon's corrupting powers, but learning how to do that cost a lot of people their lives since each failure left them tempered, and the only cure they knew of was death. That caused Owen to try to get researchers to work on a cure for tempering, but the proposal was rejected by Amon. He didn't think healing the tempered was important, and when Owen argued, he was stripped of his rank and kicked out. He figured his report would be deleted from the archives after that, which is why he made a backup in hopes that someone would pick up where he left off and find a cure for tempering. While G'raha wants to know why Amon was against curing the tempered, Alisaie is more focused on the fact that she was right, and with Angelo she can heal tempering. Well, she can fix their souls, but she can't do anything about their modified minds. You'll need to suppress the primal's hold on the tempered while fixing their ether so you can solve both problems at once. Otherwise, they won't get taken out of the primal's control no matter what you do to their ether. It sounds difficult, but it's not something G'raha hasn't done before. He used the same techniques to store the Scion's memories in the spirit vessels, so if the technique is done right, he should be able to restore the tempered's memories while Alisaie fixes their ether. The process still sounds extremely complicated and bloody, since last time G'raha had to literally use his blood to make the process work. But on the first, he didn't have any Allagan nodes. They can simulate magic, so if they can run through trials of the memory transfer process, it should be able to do years worth of experiments in a few days. That way it could find the right way to do the transfer without G'raha having to torture himself for each test. Technically, that's the same technique you use to find the password, but to do something that complicated would need much stronger equipment, and a lot of it. So Cid sends Biggs and Wedge off to start setting up the workshop, while he sends you to get some ceruleum and ice shards to power the terminals and keep them from overheating. Since Cid gives you the money, it just takes a trip to Ishgard to get them to ship over all the ceruleum you need. On your little trip, you run into Emmerich and Lucia, who are bringing the very large Vanu chief to Ishgard to help work on dealing with the primal problem. Emmerich wouldn't mind having Estinian around when the fighting with the Empire picks back up, but he hasn't been able to catch up to the man. Since he stops by the Rising Stones more than he does Ishgard, Emmerich wants you to tell his friend to at least stop by and say hi every once in a while. Hearing that you're working on a cure for tempering gets him excited because everyone has lost someone to one primal or another, so he makes sure that you have everything that you need, and a lot of it. Cid's more than happy with what you all brought him, and during the time you were away, he and G'raha have set up the terminal with the help of Nero, who may as well admit that he likes working with Cid, which is why he let Jesse hire him. Hearing that him and Cid worked together to learn time travel played a part in him staying too. After the prep work, Cid turns on the machine and it becomes a waiting game, which means you finally get to take a nap, one that ends when the machine starts to overload. Instead of shutting it down like they should have, they leave it running, and as expected, it explodes. But G'raha sees the spell he needs right before the screen goes black. It still needs to be tested, but he thinks he found the spell he needs to cure tempering. Which is good, because after that explosion, that machine will never run again. Alisaie's been waiting for this for a long time, and since she has the cure, she rushes off to Limsa Lominsa to test it on Gabu. Unexpectedly, Alphinaud and Y'shtola are in the city. They were supposed to be having a meeting with pirates about the primal threat, but some of the major groups didn't show up to the meeting, so it was cancelled. Which means that they get to witness your attempt to cure tempering. G'raha will deal with the memory part by putting the spell into Angelo like he did with the spirit vessels, which will keep him from having to cast the spell every time they want to try it. The process will still take a lot of ether, and since G'raha can't use the Crystal Tower's energy anymore, he'll need some of yours, which means it's good that Alphinaud and Y'shtola showed up. After G'raha has done his part, Alisaie takes Gabu off to begin the treatment because it will take a bit of time. When she comes back, she's barely able to stand, but it worked. Gabu is back to normal, which means Alisaie has officially cured tempering. Now she wants to cure everyone that's been tempered, but the amount of ether it took to heal someone who was barely tempered nearly killed her, so to cure more severe cases would take far more ether than you all could gather. Plus, the treatment won't work on people who are so far gone that their bodies have started to mutate. You will need a lot to be able to make the cure widespread, starting with a whole lot more Porxies, and if you want help making familiars, there's no one better than Matoya, the real one. So it's time to pay a visit to Y'shtola's master, who will not be happy that she hasn't visited her since she came back from the first. And that's where we're going to stop for today. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, subscribe, and ding that notification bell. And if you want to buy me a coffee for my work, sign up to become a member of the channel. Until next time, guys. Later.